The chamber was supposed to be solemn, a place of order and reverence. Yet on this day, it felt like a stage. Harsh white lights poured down from above, casting long shadows over polished wood and iron-backed chairs. Cameras hummed, lenses unblinking, as if the entire nation leaned in to watch. The air was thick, heavy with anticipation, when the gavel cracked once, sharp as a gunshot. Silence followed, brittle and tense. And then came the voice, icy, cutting, wrapped in authority. Judge Amy Coney Barrett leaned forward, her tone dripping with condescension as she leveled her words at Jasmine Crockett. It wasn't just an objection, not merely a challenge, it was an attack, meant to diminish. She dismissed Crockett's argument with the subtle cruelty of someone too certain of her power, the kind of dismissal that said, "You don't belong here. Sit down." For a moment, the sound seemed to echo, bouncing off the marble walls and settling in the ears of everyone watching. Some eyes darted toward the cameras. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of whether to look at Barrett or at the woman she had targeted. The power imbalance hung in the air like smoke. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She sat still, shoulders squared, her gaze narrowing just enough to register. Not rage, not fear. Something else. Resolve. Her lips pressed together, almost imperceptibly, as if measuring the weight of every possible response. Her silence spoke louder than Barrett's words. The audience in the chamber sensed it. The cameras zoomed closer, hungry for a reaction. Viewers at home, scrolling through livestream feeds, leaned in without realizing. The attack was blatant. The insult was obvious. The question was, would Crockett fold beneath the weight of that institutional arrogance? Or would she rise? The chamber's stillness turned electric, like the moment before thunder splits the sky. 1,000 expectations collided. The arrogance of the bench, the dignity of the floor, the stakes of history pressing down on one exchange. The gavel sat untouched. The crowd waited. Time stretched thin. But in that silence, no one could predict the words Crockett was about to unleash. To understand the weight of that single exchange, you have to step back and see the battlefield it unfolded upon. This was never just about words exchanged in a marble chamber. It was about America itself, what it chooses to value, who it chooses to elevate, and who it tries to silence. Judge Amy Coney Barrett sat cloaked in her robe, a symbol of authority carved from centuries of institutional power. That robe was not just fabric. It was legacy, hierarchy, a reminder that certain voices had long dictated the law while others were told to wait their turn. To many watching, Barrett's tone was not only dismissive of Jasmine Crockett, but dismissive of the millions Crockett represented: immigrants, working-class families, communities of color, and anyone who had ever been told they were too loud or too much for polite halls of power. And that's where the stakes emerged. Because this wasn't just elitism in real time, it was elitism under the spotlight. Barrett wielded her authority like a shield and a sword, suggesting with every syllable that dignity belongs to the few, not the many. She embodied a system that prefers silence over truth, control over representation. And in that room, it became glaringly obvious that Crockett was not only defending her point, she was defending the right of countless Americans to even be heard. Every second of silence after Barrett's words rippled outward. For viewers at home, it wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a test. Could institutions still snuff out the voices of challengers, or would a new generation prove too unshakable, too rooted in their own worth to bow? Crockett's presence answered the question before she even spoke. Her stillness was resistance. Her narrowed gaze, defiance. She symbolized something that could not be contained. Resilience forged from struggle, a refusal to accept that dignity was a privilege bestowed from above. In her, people saw the promise of accountability, not as theory, but as lived truth. The divide was clear. On one side, robes, gavels, centuries of elitist dismissal. On the other, a woman whose very existence in that chamber was proof that the walls were cracking. That's why this moment mattered so deeply. The chamber may have been one room, but it echoed across a nation already split. Some tuned in to see if the system would flex its dominance once again. Others watched, praying for a voice to finally cut through, to stand unshaken in the face of manufactured superiority. And for those who had ever been silenced, ignored, or cast aside, Crockett's pause carried their own heartbeat. The confrontation wasn't just about her. It was about whether dignity could finally stand taller than arrogance. The tension was unbearable, the stakes undeniable. This wasn't just a verbal sparring match. It was a symbol of where America would tilt, toward exclusion or toward justice. Every breath felt heavy, every glance carried weight, every second stretched into eternity. Because when the stakes became clear, Crockett refused to play by their script. Amy Coney Barrett was never simply a judge. She was presented to America as a symbol, a carefully polished figure meant to embody dignity, restraint, and unshakable intellect. On the surface, she radiated calm authority, measured words, a soft smile, a posture that suggested neutrality above the political fray. But for millions watching her rise, that image never told the whole story. It was a performance, one perfected over years of mentorship, alignment, and loyalty to a system built on preserving power. Her supporters hailed her as impartial, a servant of the Constitution who would rise above politics. Yet, behind the robe, her decisions often seemed to lean in one direction, carving out space for partisan interests while closing the door on challenges from the people most in need. Each ruling, each remark, each dismissal became part of a pattern of elitism cloaked in reverence. It was as though the robe itself hid an empire, a vast network of ideology and privilege masquerading as principle. She spoke of fairness, yet fairness often tilted toward the powerful. She spoke of independence, yet her path to the bench was paved with partisan calculation. To her critics, Barrett became the embodiment of contradiction, a smile masking a dagger, civility concealing a sharp, deliberate bias. She would lean into the language of objectivity, but the results often told a different story. Doors closed for workers, hurdles raised for women, silence delivered to communities seeking their day in court. And then there was her manner, the subtle but unmistakable air of condescension when confronted by those she viewed as challengers. Dismissive nods, curt answers, the occasional arch of an eyebrow that carried more scorn than any shouted insult. To some, it was confidence. To others, it was the sneer of someone too certain of their untouchability. Again and again, she embodied the same move: silence dissent with poise, diminish opponents with a smile, brush aside real struggle with a carefully rehearsed phrase. That pattern was not new. It stretched back through confirmation hearings, through her early judicial decisions, through every moment she was asked to reconcile lofty ideals with the lived realities of those who bore the brunt of inequality. Again and again, she chose the robe over the people, the institution over the individual. Yet what made Barrett most formidable was not her rulings alone. It was her ability to sell the image. To those who aligned with her worldview, she seemed unshakable. The brilliant jurist, the composed mother, the woman who had ascended to the pinnacle of American law. She was marketed as proof that institutions could be fair, that the system worked. But beneath that polished surface, critics saw something else entirely: the reinforcement of an old order, carefully dressed in the language of virtue. This duality, hero to some, villain to others, created the perfect storm, because when she attacked Jasmine Crockett, she wasn't merely speaking as a judge, she was speaking as the embodiment of an entire hierarchy. Her words carried the weight of centuries of exclusion, as if the chamber itself whispered through her, "We decide. You obey." But history has shown that when power grows too comfortable, too assured of its invulnerability, cracks begin to form. Barrett's reliance on dismissal, her habit of cloaking bias in civility, her pattern of brushing aside dissent, all of it carried the seeds of downfall. For every smile masking a dagger, there comes a moment when the blade is seen. For every robe hiding an empire, there comes a challenger bold enough to pull the curtain back. And in that chamber, the pattern was repeating once more. Barrett, lofty and unbothered, delivering her attack with the quiet cruelty of authority unchecked. But something was different this time. The silence that followed was not submission. It was anticipation. The eyes that shifted were not avoiding conflict. They were bracing for it. Because one voice, rising in that chamber, was about to pierce through her fortress. Long before the bright lights of the chamber or the glare of television cameras, Jasmine Crockett's story began in places most Americans would recognize: church basements, crowded classrooms, neighborhoods where people worked twice as hard, for half as much. She was raised not with silver spoons, but with the stubborn determination that if the door was closed, you found a way to knock louder. If the system ignored you, you organized until it couldn't. As a child, she learned early what it meant to stand out in spaces that weren't built for her. Teachers underestimated her, classmates repeated stereotypes, and the world seemed to expect silence from her voice. But Crockett's answer to those pressures was never surrender. She absorbed every slight, every insult, every door slammed in her face, and turned it into fuel. What might have scarred someone else became armor she carried proudly, a visible testament to survival. Her first battles were small but defining. Student council races where whispers of "she doesn't belong" only pushed her to campaign harder. Debates where she memorized every fact because she knew her margin of error would never be granted the grace given to others. From those early days, she understood that dignity wasn't handed down. It was fought for, word by word, action by action. Crockett's calling drew her into law, where she discovered that the courtroom was another battlefield of imbalance. She represented those who had no other voice, defending clients who couldn't afford polished attorneys or influential connections. There she faced not only the cases themselves, but the undercurrent of sexism and racism that shadowed every proceeding. Judges cut her off mid-sentence. Opposing counsel sneered at her youth, her gender, her skin. But she refused to let the dismissals dictate her worth. Instead, she doubled down, building cases so airtight that even her detractors were forced to respect the substance, if not the woman. And still, she wasn't satisfied with victories won in court alone. The law could protect individuals, but systems required bigger battles. So she stepped into politics, not with establishment backing or billionaire donors, but with a grassroots fire. Her campaign wasn't crafted in think tanks, it was built door to door, conversation by conversation, fueled by people who saw in her someone unafraid to carry their struggles into spaces that too often excluded them. Picture the scenes. Crockett, walking neighborhood streets long after sunset, the soles of her shoes worn thin, knocking on doors while most of her rivals dined at fundraisers. Picture the kitchen tables where she sat, listening to families explain how bills piled up or how their children faced the same discrimination she once endured. Those nights were not glamorous. They were exhausting, filled with rejection, fatigue, and doubt. But each conversation planted a seed, proof that her campaign was not about optics. It was about service. Her rise wasn't smooth, and it was never uncontested. At every step, someone tried to reduce her to a stereotype. Too young, too bold, too angry. Yet she leaned into the truth that had always fueled her, that being underestimated was her greatest advantage. The more they tried to box her in, the more she broke through. She carried the scars of rejection, but instead of hiding them, she showed them as proof. Proof that she had been tested. Proof that she had survived. Proof that she belonged. By the time Crockett walked into that chamber, she wasn't just another politician or lawyer. She was a living narrative of resilience, a woman who had faced everything elitism could throw at her and still chosen to fight. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the people who had walked beside her, trusted her, and sent her into those halls as their champion. That's why Barrett's attack cut deeper than a single insult. For Crockett, every attempt to silence her echoed the silences imposed on the communities she carried with her. Every dismissive glance reminded her of judges who waved her off, teachers who doubted her, politicians who ignored her. And that's why she would not fold. Because Jasmine Crockett was never just speaking for herself. She was speaking for the mother working 2 jobs who still showed up at a town hall. She was speaking for the immigrant child translating documents, for their parents. She was speaking for the young black student told they were too much, for the woman overlooked in every boardroom, for the worker fighting for fairness with no safety net beneath them. Her story had always been about transformation. Scars into armor, obstacles into stepping stones, pain into purpose. And when she fixed her gaze on Barrett, that transformation reached its sharpest point. This was not just another courtroom battle or campaign stop. This was history repeating itself and giving her the chance to answer. And so, when Barrett tried to silence her, Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for millions. The gavel's echo had barely faded before Barrett struck again, her tone sharpened into a scalpel. She leaned forward, voice steady but edged with disdain, cutting into Crockett's statement with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this dismissal 100 times before. "That's irrelevant," she declared, her words hanging in the air like a verdict. It wasn't simply an interruption. It was a command to stop speaking, to retreat. The room froze. A ripple of unease traveled across the chamber, the kind of silence that prickles against the skin. Barrett smirked faintly, the corners of her mouth lifting just enough to register on the cameras. She believed she had reasserted dominance. That Crockett's voice would fold under the weight of centuries of judicial arrogance. But Crockett did not retreat. Her hands, resting on the desk before her, tightened just slightly, the faintest tremor in her knuckles betraying the storm she contained. The camera caught it, zooming in on that silent gesture, the tension of a woman holding fire in her palms. Her composure remained unbroken. When she spoke again, her tone was calm, deliberate, as if every word had been forged to withstand interruption. "Respectfully, Judge, it is not irrelevant when people's lives hang in the balance." Her words sliced through the silence, not raised in anger but weighted with clarity. The crowd murmured, a low wave of sound that quickly subsided when Barrett's eyes darted in warning. The judge responded swiftly, cold and clipped, attempting to reframe Crockett's argument as emotional, unfounded, beneath the dignity of the chamber. Her voice carried the same message it always had. "I am untouchable. You are expendable." Yet every icy dismissal only made Crockett's restraint more powerful. She did not rise to the bait. She countered with precision, building her case point by point, weaving facts with the gravity of lived experience. Where Barrett leaned on authority, Crockett leaned on truth. Where Barrett projected distance, Crockett drew the audience closer, pulling them into her argument as if she were speaking directly to each person watching at home. The tension became unbearable. Cameras darted between the 2 women. Barrett's expression tightening with impatience, Crockett's gaze steady, her voice unshaken. Viewers online began typing furiously, flooding comment sections and live-stream chats. She's holding her ground. Don't let her cut you off. This is history. The chamber itself seemed to breathe with anticipation. Each interruption from Barrett felt sharper, more desperate. Each rebuttal from Crockett landed heavier, louder, gaining momentum. The divide was on full display. One woman insulated by robes and authority, the other armored by resilience and clarity. Barrett leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, her smirk returning as if to signal the inevitability of her control. Yet, her eyes betrayed something else, a flicker of recognition that Crockett's poise was not cracking, that the usual tactics of dismissal were failing. The room shifted. Senators adjusted in their seats. Reporters scribbled faster. Staffers whispered, nervously at the edges of the chamber. Everyone knew they were approaching the breaking point, the moment when controlled sparring would give way to something far more explosive. And then it happened. The beat between words, the pause long enough to stretch like an elastic band pulled, to its limit. Barrett opened her mouth to deliver yet another rebuke. Crockett's chin lifted, her eyes locking on the judge with the steadiness of someone who had carried too many battles to be shaken now. Until the moment, the entire chamber leaned forward, waiting for Crockett's strike. The chamber seemed to tilt forward, every breath suspended in the razor-thin silence. Barrett's smirk lingered, certain she had cornered Jasmine Crockett into submission. But Crockett, hands steady now, leaned into the microphone. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her first words came soft, deliberate, each syllable carrying the weight of history. "Judge, with all due respect, when you call my concerns irrelevant, you're not dismissing me. You're dismissing the people who sent me here. You're dismissing their lives, their rights, their dignity." The murmurs began immediately, rippling through the crowd. Barrett shifted in her seat, the smirk faltering, ever so slightly. Cameras captured every twitch of her jaw, every blink that came a fraction too slow. Crockett let the murmurs swell before continuing, her voice steady, her pace unhurried. She was no longer answering Barrett. She was speaking to America. For years, too many people in this country have been told their voices don't matter, that their experiences are anecdotal, their struggles exaggerated, their pain irrelevant. And they've been told this, not in whispers, but in rooms exactly like this one, rooms where those in power sit in robes and gavels and tell them to wait their turn. The air tightened, charged like the sky before lightning. Crockett paused, her eyes locking on Barrett with unshakable resolve. The cameras zoomed closer, catching the fire in her gaze. She let the silence linger just long enough to force the weight of her words onto everyone listening. And yet, here we are. You may call me irrelevant, but I stand here carrying the weight of those whose voices you'd rather erase, and I refuse to be erased. A low gasp swept across the chamber. Commentators watching the live stream began firing off tweets, their fingers racing. She said it. "This is the moment. Clip this now." Barrett cleared her throat, ready to interject, but Crockett pressed on, her voice rising now, firm and resolute. "You claim impartiality, Judge, but impartiality is not silence. It is not looking away when the powerful exploit the powerless. It is not pretending neutrality while leaning on the side of privilege. That is not impartiality. That is complicity." The words landed like hammer blows. Barrett's composure wavered, her lips tightening as if she'd just bitten into something sour. The smirk was gone. In its place stood a mask cracking at the edges. Crockett leaned forward, closer to the mic, lowering her tone, forcing everyone to lean in. "You can dismiss me if you want, but you cannot dismiss the truth." That was the pivot. The chamber stirred, the crowd murmuring louder. Now, the rhythm of her words striking like a drumbeat. And then came the line, the one destined to live far beyond this chamber, destined to replay in clips and headlines, destined to trend. "Power may sit in your robes, Judge, but dignity sits in my voice, and dignity will outlast your arrogance." Gasps erupted. Some in the chamber clapped before quickly silencing themselves. The crowd outside exploded. Social media timelines lit up, hashtags forming in real time. Comment sections filled with, "Did you hear that?" and "Replay that line." The pause that followed was cinematic. Barrett blinking, visibly searching for footing, while Crockett sat unflinching, her eyes steady, her body calm. Barrett tried to respond, her voice sharper now, clipped, defensive. But the more she spoke, the more the chamber seemed to recoil. Her rebuttal, once authoritative, now sounded hollow, like a cracked bell. She accused Crockett of grandstanding, of dramatizing issues that required dispassion. But the words fell flat. Because Crockett had shifted the terrain, she wasn't debating legal theory. She was holding a mirror to the entire system, and America was watching. "You call it dramatizing," she replied, her voice carrying above Barrett's. "I call it survival. I call it truth. And if the truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe it should." The chamber erupted again. Whispers, gasps, the restless shuffle of chairs. Barrett's face reddened under the glare of cameras. Her fingers clenched the edge of the desk, her jaw tight, her eyes darting not toward Crockett but toward the audience, as though seeking refuge from their gaze. Crockett, by contrast, looked immovable. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She let the power of her words hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. She had dismantled Barrett's authority piece by piece, not with anger, but with precision, turning every dismissal back against its source. Outside the chamber, live feeds captured the eruption of social media. Clips of her "Power may sit in your robes" line were already looping across platforms. Memes appeared in minutes. Barrett cloaked in crumbling marble. Crockett's words etched across the screen like scripture. Influencers, activists, even celebrities began chiming in. "This is the energy we need." She said what we've all been waiting to hear. And still, Crockett wasn't finished. She turned one last time toward Barrett, her voice steady, her tone almost solemn now. "You see, Judge, this chamber has silenced voices like mine for generations. But silence is no longer an option. Not for me, not for the people I represent, not for this country." The words reverberated, bouncing against the walls, lingering long after she finished speaking. Barrett sat frozen, her authority shattered. In real time, her silence louder than any rebuttal she could muster. The gavel never came down. No one moved to restore order, because everyone, from the senators in the room to the millions watching at home, knew they had just witnessed the shift of momentum. A line had been drawn, and it would not be erased. But Crockett wasn't done. Her words would echo far beyond those walls. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her line, "Power may sit in your robes, Judge, but dignity sits in my voice, and dignity will outlast your arrogance," the internet detonated. Within seconds, clips of the exchange flooded social. Media, cut into 20-second bursts, looped over dramatic music, layered with flashing captions. Hashtags blazed across the digital landscape. "Voice over robes, you hurt Lux Crockett, clap back, digu." Dignity over arrogance. On Twitter, the clip trended #1 within an hour. Split-screen edits began to appear, pairing Barrett's faltering expression with Crockett's unwavering stare. Memes were generated in real time. Barrett's smirk replaced with cartoon cracks, Crockett framed in golden light like a heroine in a blockbuster. TikTok users stitched the moment into reaction videos, gasping, cheering, even crying on camera. One video of a young girl mouthing Crockett's words in front of her bathroom mirror racked up millions of views overnight. The commentary was immediate and loud. Late-night hosts replayed the exchange with theatrical reenactments, audiences roaring with laughter when Barrett's silence was dragged out for comedic effect. Celebrities chimed in, actors, athletes, singers, each posting their own clips of the mic drop, attaching messages of solidarity. This, right here, this is what leadership looks like, one pop star tweeted to her 40 million followers. But, beyond the spectacle, there was something deeper. Grassroots organizers clipped the speech into campaign reels, splicing Crockett's words over footage of marches, rallies, and protests. Activist groups launched donation drives under her name. Community leaders who had long felt ignored now had a rallying cry, a phrase to carry into their own battles. Churches played the clip during Sunday services. College students blasted it across projectors at campus events. Even political commentators, jaded from years of spin and empty sound bites, admitted something had shifted. Pollsters noticed immediate upticks in Crockett's favorability ratings. Overnight, she went from a respected voice to a national figure. Endorsements poured in, not just from allies but from figures who had once kept their distance, unwilling to risk aligning with someone too bold. Now, bold was the currency of the moment. And Barrett, her carefully cultivated image of composure began to crack. Commentators replayed her reaction frame by frame, the tightening jaw, the darting eyes, the smirk collapsing. Editorial headlines used words like flustered, unprepared, shaken. Questions surfaced about her impartiality, her judgment, even her legitimacy. The more she tried to retreat behind her robe, the more the public saw it not as authority but as a shield. Cinematically, it felt like a montage unfolding across the nation. In living rooms, families leaned closer to their televisions, nodding as Crockett's words replayed again and again. In diners, strangers huddled over phones, replaying the clip between bites of breakfast. In barbershops, hair paused mid-trim, as the room erupted into cheers. In classrooms, teachers held up the video as an example of speaking truth to power. The chamber's walls had contained the original moment, but the echo had broken free, bouncing across cities, towns, and neighborhoods with unstoppable force. One viral video stitched together reaction shots. A grandmother in Detroit clapping. Her hands, a college student in Houston throwing his arms into the air, a group of workers in Chicago standing to cheer. "This is us," the caption read. And people believed it. Crockett's words were no longer just her own. They had become a vessel for a collective identity, for a nation hungry to see arrogance challenged and dignity affirmed. News networks ran wall-to-wall coverage. Commentators dissected every angle, some applauding Crockett as the new face of accountability, others nervously questioning what it meant for judicial authority to be so publicly undermined. But the narrative had already broken free from control. This wasn't a think-piece moment. It was a cultural shift. Everywhere you looked, the balance of power seemed to tremble. Polls shifted, endorsements solidified, investigations began, circling around the very institutions Barrett represented. It was as if Crockett's words had pulled a hidden thread, unraveling confidence in systems too long shielded from scrutiny. And as the digital wildfire spread, a bigger question began to surface. What comes next? In the afterglow of that electrifying clash, one truth rose above the noise. This was never just about a courtroom exchange, or even about Judge Amy Coney Barrett and Jasmine Crockett. This was about something larger, something woven into the very fabric of America: dignity versus arrogance, service versus power, truth versus manipulation. In that chamber, we caught a glimpse of the future we're all deciding together. Crockett's words weren't polished for political theater. They weren't designed to flatter the elites who sit comfortably behind their titles and robes. They were raw, forged from the fires of lived experience, sharpened by nights on campaign trails, and tempered by years of being told to wait her turn. That authenticity is why her counterpunch landed with such seismic force. She wasn't speaking at the people. She was speaking for them. Every time Barrett leaned on her robe as a symbol of untouchable authority, Crockett reminded us that the robe is nothing without the people's faith in the justice it represents. And that's the fracture line we all felt. One side clings to symbols, to titles, to polished reputations built on exclusion. The other side, Crockett's side, fights with nothing but truth, grit, and a belief that the people's dignity will outlast every smirk, every interruption, every attempt to silence. The beauty of this moment is that it wasn't confined to the walls of power. It spilled outward into living rooms, classrooms, coffee shops, and sidewalks. It became a mirror reflecting the fight so many Americans already know too well. Immigrants, workers, mothers, students, people who've been told they don't belong, people dismissed as too small to matter, saw themselves in Crockett's resolve. Her voice wasn't just her own. It was theirs, amplified, sharpened, and delivered to the very face of condescension. And maybe that's why the clip hit so hard, because beneath the spectacle was a lesson. Arrogance crumbles in the face of dignity. It might take time. It might take bruises. But when someone refuses to bow, refuses to accept the script handed to them, something shifts. That's how history has always been written, not by those clutching titles, but by those brave enough to challenge them. The moral isn't abstract. It's personal. It tells us that courage is contagious, that dignity isn't just a word, but a choice. Crockett's composure, her fire, her refusal to shrink, that belongs to all of us. It's the same energy we summon when we speak up at work, when we defend a neighbor, when we refuse to accept the easy lie over the difficult truth. What happened in that chamber wasn't just a mic drop, it was a reminder that when we fight for dignity, we are never alone, that every arrogant dismissal is an opportunity for clarity, that every attempt to silence is a stage for truth. So yes, Crockett won that day, but the real story is about us, about a country learning, slowly but surely, that dignity is stronger than arrogance, service is deeper than power, truth cuts sharper than manipulation. And in that quiet after the storm, as Crockett's words echoed in every corner of the nation, a soft but urgent question lingered. Because the real trial isn't over. It's happening every day in how we choose to act. Barrett came in swinging with the arrogance of untouchable power. She tried to reduce Jasmine Crockett to a footnote, a mere target of dismissal, but the attack backfired. Crockett didn't just hold her ground, she flipped the trial, turned the chamber into a stage for truth, and left America buzzing with a moment that will be replayed for years to come. This wasn't just political theater, it was a reminder of who we are when dignity confronts arrogance, when power tries to silence, but truth refuses to yield. Barrett's icy smirk couldn't withstand the fire of resilience. And Crockett proved that even in the face of centuries-old institutions, one voice, steady, sharp, and rooted in the people, can tilt the room. But here's the thing. This story doesn't end in that chamber. It continues with us, with you, with every person who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they don't belong. This moment is bigger than a single clash. It's a movement, a call to remind the powerful that they serve us, not the other way around. So here's what you can do. Subscribe to this channel, share this video with someone who needs to feel that spark, and comment below with your story of resilience. Because when we add our voices together, we become impossible to ignore. The battle between dignity and arrogance isn't over. It's unfolding in courtrooms, classrooms, workplaces, and communities across this nation. And if tonight has shown us anything, it's that truth, when spoken boldly, can still break through. This is just the beginning. The next chapter is coming, and you won't want to miss it.